The headline sounds definitive, the statements sound emotional, but the full story is far more complicated than a single accusation or a single denial, according to publicly available court documents and statements from both sides. This case is now less about one moment and more about timelines, authority, and what investigators say versus what the defense insists never happened. And there's one detail most people miss at first glance. At the center of this case is actor and director Timothy Busfield, who is maintaining his innocence after being officially charged with 2 counts of criminal sexual contact of a minor and 1 count of child abuse. His attorney has described the allegations as absolutely false, saying Busfield is shocked and devastated by what he calls a complete distortion of events, but prosecutors see something very different. According to a warrant obtained by multiple media outlets, investigators allege that Busfield engaged in unlawful conduct involving 2 minor children he met while working on a television production. The alleged incidents, according to that warrant, span a period of time and involve claims that authorities say raise serious concerns about boundaries. At professional authority. It's important to be clear here, these are allegations. They have not been proven in court, and Busfield has not been convicted of any crimes still. The legal response moved quickly. On January 13th, Busfield turned himself into authorities in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Shortly afterward, prosecutors filed a motion seeking pretrial detention, arguing that he should remain in custody. While the case proceeds, the reasoning was unusually strong. In the motion, prosecutors claimed that Busfield posed what they described as an ongoing risk to the community, citing what they characterized as a pattern of behavior and misuse of professional access. They argued that no combination of release conditions would be sufficient to address those concerns. That filing immediately escalated the public conversation, but the defense says the entire foundation of that argument is flawed. According to Busfield's attorney, Larry Stein, there is no evidence supporting the prosecution's narrative. Stein argues that the accusations stem not from misconduct, but from a dispute tied to the television show where the children were employed. Here's where the timeline becomes critical. The minors involved were reportedly child actors who appeared on a Fox television series that ran for several years. According to the defense, as the show approached its later seasons, production decisions were made about casting continuity specifically related to the ages of the characters. Stein claims that when the children were no longer able to continue in their roles due to age constraints within the storyline, their parents became deeply upset. The defense alleges that this decision, not any inappropriate behavior, triggered the complaints. Investigators, however, tell a different story. According to the warrant, law enforcement says the parents reported concerns that went beyond casting decisions. Those concerns eventually led to a broader inquiry and later formal charges. Busfield has stated that he was informed by the studio that an outside investigation had been conducted after a complaint was filed. According to statements included in the warrant, Busfield acknowledged being told that allegations involved the 2 minors in question. An independent investigator hired by the studio later released a statement saying that, based on the information available at the time, there was no corroborating evidence that Busfield engaged in inappropriate conduct on set or that he was ever alone with the children. That statement has become a central pillar of the defense, but prosecutors argue that their case extends beyond what was or wasn't observed on a film set. And then, just one day after the initial detention motion was filed, an additional allegation surfaced. According to a supplemental filing, another individual came forward with claims involving a separate incident from many years earlier, in a different state, and under very different circumstances. The defense immediately pushed back. Busfield's attorney described those allegations as decades old, unproven, and unrelated to the current case, arguing that they should not be used to justify detention or influence public opinion. So now, the case stands at a crossroads. On one side, prosecutors arguing that the pattern matters. On the other, the defense insisting the accusations are retaliatory, unsupported, and fundamentally false. And hanging over all of it is one question that hasn't been answered yet: which version of events will hold up under legal scrutiny? What makes this case especially complex is not just the number of allegations, but how differently each side interprets the same timeline. According to publicly available information, shortly after the initial complaint was made, the production company informed Busfield that an internal review was underway. That review conducted by an outside investigator, concluded that there was no verified evidence of misconduct on set for the defense. This point is critical. Busfield's attorney has repeatedly emphasized that the investigation found no indication that Busfield was ever alone with the children during production, a detail he argues directly contradicts the prosecution's narrative. But prosecutors are not relying solely on workplace oversight. Their filings suggest that the alleged behavior occurred outside the immediate view of production safeguards, raising broader questions about supervision, trust, and professional access. This distinction matters because in cases involving minors, prosecutors often argue that inappropriate conduct, if it occurred, does not require witnesses to be legally relevant. The absence of corroboration, they say, does not automatically invalidate an allegation. The defense strongly disputes this interpretation. According to Stein, there is no physical evidence, no contemporaneous report, and no witness testimony that substantiates the claims. He argues that the accusations only emerged after a professional dispute. It should be viewed through that lens. Adding another layer to the story is Busfield's own public response. Moments before surrendering to authorities, he released a short video in which he denied all allegations, stating plainly that he had not engaged in any inappropriate conduct and that he intended to fight the charges through the legal system. The video was emotional, but measured. There were no accusations directed at specific individuals, no attacks on law enforcement, and no attempt to influence potential witnesses. Instead, Busfield framed the situation as a legal battle he believed would ultimately resolve in his favor. His wife, actress Melissa Gilbert, has not spoken publicly about the details of the case. Through her representative, she stated that she stands by her husband and would address the public at an appropriate time. That silence, intentional or not, has fueled speculation online, but legally, it changes nothing. What does change the trajectory of the case is the prosecution's attempt to keep Busfield in custody prior to trial. Pretrial detention motions are not routine. They require prosecutors to argue not only that charges are serious, but that release would pose an unacceptable risk. In their filing, they cited concerns about what they described as patterns of behavior and alleged misuse of authority. The defense calls that language inflammatory. Stein argues that the prosecution is asking the court to accept allegations as fact before a trial has even occurred. He maintains that Busfield has no prior convictions related to these claims, and that the additional allegation raised in the detention motion dates back roughly 25 years. According to the defense, that older claim was never prosecuted, never proven, and has no direct connection to the current charges from a legal standpoint. This creates tension. Courts must balance community safety with the presumption of innocence. They must decide whether past accusations, especially unadjudicated ones, can justify holding someone without bail, and that decision often sets the tone for everything that follows. Meanwhile, the organizations connected to Busfield's past have begun issuing carefully worded statements. A theater company where Busfield was once involved confirmed that he has not held a role there for more than 2 decades, and that legal counsel had previously conducted an internal review when concerns were raised. Again, no conclusions, just distancing and documentation. And that's a pattern you'll see repeatedly in cases like this. Institutions rarely make judgments. They confirm procedures. As public attention grows, so does the pressure to simplify the story into sides, guilt or innocence, truth or fabrication. But the legal system does not move that way. It moves through filings, motions, evidentiary standards, and testimony, much of which has not yet happened. At this stage, the only certainty is uncertainty. The charges are real, the denials are firm, and the outcome is unknown. What happens next depends on a series of decisions that will unfold away from headlines inside courtrooms, under oath, and subject to cross-examination. And the most consequential of those decisions is still ahead. At this point, the case against Timothy Busfield exists in the parallel realities. In one, prosecutors argue that the allegations viewed together suggest a concerning pattern that warrants strict legal intervention. In the other, the defense insists that the claims are unsupported, retaliatory, and contradicted by prior investigations. What hasn't happened yet is the part that matters most. There has been no trial. No cross-examination. No judicial finding of guilt or innocence, and that distinction is critical. Because public opinion often moves faster than due process, especially when high-profile names and emotionally charged allegations are involved. But the legal system is designed imperfectly, but intentionally to slow things down and separate accusation from proof. Regardless of where the case ultimately lands, it highlights a broader issue that extends far beyond any single individual. How should allegations involving minors be handled when they emerge years later? What role should independent investigations play alongside criminal proceedings? And how do courts weigh community safety against the foundational principle of presumed innocence? These questions don't have easy answers. They require evidence, they require context, and they require restraint. In the coming months, the focus will shift from statements and filings to hearings, motions, and potentially testimony. Details will be examined not for shock value, but for consistency, credibility, and corroboration. Only then will a clearer picture begin to emerge. For now, the story remains unfinished. And if you want to understand how cases like this typically unfold from pretrial decisions to evidentiary battles and the standards courts actually apply, that's exactly what we'll break down next. Not speculation, not headlines. Just the process. Because sometimes the most important part of a story isn't what's being said loudly, it's what hasn't been decided yet. If you want to continue following this case and understand the legal mechanics behind it, the next video explores how pretrial detention decisions are made and what they mean for the outcome of high-profile cases like this one.